Unanimously. The next item is the consent agenda.
Move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously. We have a public hearing today, and the public hearing, go ahead, Mr. Mendez.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. The public hearing we're going to have in a few minutes today is to consider the establishment of a county energy transportation reinvestment zone. As you recall in our previous briefings, this is a necessary step in order for the county to have access to a grant fund that was created by this previous legislature to provide money to counties for the repair of roads damaged by the truck traffic associated with the oil and gas production industry statewide. Tarrant County is eligible for about $2.4 million, but one of the necessary steps that the state is requiring us to do is to implement a tax reinvestment zone for the purpose for one of these projects. All the projects that are funded by the grant do not have to be in the zone, but we need to have one zone in order to get to the grant. And right now, this is just the first step. We've got 30 days in order to determine the actual boundaries of that zone if the court so directs us to move forward with this. Mr. Riley from the Transportation Department has had extensive discussions with all the precincts. We have developed a list of projects from which we will consider one of them for this zone, and as well as other projects for the submission for the grant. But the purpose of this public hearing is simply to determine whether or not the court wishes us to move forward with this process and to give us direction to use this next 30 days to allocate or determine the boundaries of that zone. And I think Bill may have some comments about the process that we've been using to evaluate the roads.
While Bill's coming on down, I'm going to go back and ask Commissioner Johnson. I apologize. I thought you were right outside here. Would you vote in favor of the approval of the minutes and the consent agenda?
Both.
Record him as in favor.
Morning.
Of those. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Of the county that shows all of the projects that were submitted. They're all highlighted in green.
Thank you.
All of the roadways that are denoted in green are the ones that were submitted by the precincts for consideration. And also I have a spreadsheet that shows the summation or a summary of all the projects, the limits, the estimated cost. And also on this, Trammell and myself went out and evaluated every one of the roads using the criteria that we came up with as far as assessing
Thank you.
the condition of the roads. It's shown in one column. It shows the formula over to the side, which we use to come up with. Again, over in the first column is the projects as submitted by the precincts with their priority next to it in parentheses. The roadway is the next one, and the limits as far as between a certain road and another road. And the estimated costs of which were submitted by the precincts, and the project assessment score. And to kind of give you an idea of what we used, it's shown over on the right side. Score range is 0, it means good, and the higher the number is, the poorer the condition of the road. And what we used as the factors were in assessing the score was cracking. We use that as 20%. Potholes at 18%. Large repairs, 20%. Flushing and bleeding, which is when the asphalt comes through the aggregate, it becomes, kind of flushed. We had that at 12%. The width of the road, which is not really attributable to the oil and gas, but some of the roads are fairly narrow. If they want to be rebuilt, they may want to be rebuilt a little bit wider. So we had a score for that, which was only 8%. Pavement edge was 8% also, which a lot of it is, if the pavement edge has been damaged, it's usually on the inside of a curve where trucks have run off the road, kind of on the edge. And then surface skid is mainly for if they're shiny or has something to do with that. And that was shown as 14%, which came out with a 100% score. We gave it a grade of 0 to 10 on each one of these factors, and then multiplied it out, and that's how we came up with that project assessment score. So I'll be glad to take any questions or comments that you have. A lot of it's just the summation of the information which were presented to us by each one of the commissioners' precincts.
You said did you evaluate the priority, or did the commissioners go back and?
It's the commissioners' priorities as far as their offices put the priority on, which is what is in parentheses over in that first column. But as you can tell, also the summation of the estimated cost is $23.5 million worth of projects, and we're talking right now at, $2.4 million. There is a possibility that we may get more. I think all of y'all are aware of that. Depends on how many the counties decide to participate in this program. But I don't know if we'll get $23 million worth, but that's a list that we're submitting.
Do we submit so we've got 2.5 million. If we, in the next 30 days, we've got to define our boundaries. The money we get can be used anywhere. That's correct, right?
It has to be associated with a project, from what I understand. So in other words, we've got to submit the projects, a list of projects, and
so we could submit all these projects. They don't all have to be inside of our TERS or our SERS or whatever the hell we call it.
I believe that's correct.
We would have to allocate, it would be unadvisable to submit all of these projects, because if we did get that $2.5 million award, we would have to allocate a portion of that money to all of the projects that we submitted. So in our best interest to get the biggest bang for the buck is probably to narrow that number of projects down to maybe double the recommended attack, that we ask for double what we actually are anticipated to get, and that way we can use more grant money towards those projects than spreading it out as thinly.
I thought that we had to have a SERS.
Yes, sir.
But once that we had the SERS, the money did not have to be spent within the SERS.
That's correct.
But that all of the money, whatever our definition of the SERS were, that 100% of that increment increased value in that particular area. 100% had to be committed to projects within that particular deal.
Yes, sir. But that does not limit the total number of projects we submit.
But what I'm saying is you're saying if we...
You're talking two things. I think you're talking about the grant money that the state's going to give us, and then you're talking about step two. Once we establish this for the next 10 years, the taxes from that area goes into a pot. What is that pot used for?
That pot is used for any project within that district, regardless of the grant, regardless of any project we submitted for the grant.
But it has to be within the zone?
Yes, sir.
The grant does not have to be spent.
The grant does not have to be, but any road segment that is impacted by oil and gas industry within the zone, There's a continual flow of money based on the increment
Mark,
that keeps going into that.
I thought we decided, or we came to the conclusion that at least one project had to be in the zone.
Just one.
Is that not correct?
That is correct.
Well, a minute ago, you said no. Or you indicated that you didn't have to have a project, you didn't have to do a project in the zone. Do you or don't?
I'm,
Project?
if that is what I said, I misspoke. That is not correct, sir. At least one project has to be within the zone.
So the grant money can be used for projects within the zone and outside of the zone.
Yes, sir.
The tax increment have to be used for projects within the zone.
Within the zone. The increment is only for projects within the zone, and that exists for 10 years.
Let's talk about the project assessment score for just a minute. I'm assuming that you came up with these assessments based on the condition of those roads?
That's very
So if
correct.
we're maintaining our roads properly, we didn't make the list. We didn't get up there high on the rating, did we?
As far as the assessment, the lower the number, the better your road is, yes.
Good job.
Good job, J.D.
I guess so.
Well, that's essentially what
Now
it
you don't
says.
want to try to give you all those roads.
With no more miles than you've got, they should all be lined with gold.
I don't have a road guy.
Now, the one other part that you said.
I'm not sure I agree with that assessment score. I mean, I think we need to look at the overall, not just the condition of the roads, because some are maintained better than others. Just a fact.
Well, and I guess this is where I'm kind of trying to go. Regardless of, the one thing I hadn't caught before, or at least I didn't understand before, is that we submit projects. Why do we even have to, do we have to submit enough projects to justify the amount of money we've requested?
Yeah, I would assume that's true.
Well, we've exceeded that.
Yes.
Well, but I know that, and I guess my question is,
21 million.
do we have to, so you're saying that we can submit all these projects, they give us 2.5, and we can't just go back and pick where we're gonna spend the 2.5, we have to spend a little bit on every one?
That's my understanding.
Which means that we lose whatever, if we, let's say we double it, and we allocate, that means we have to allocate 50% on each one. Now we have to do both of them, even though we're only getting, so it would, we're gonna leave money on the table by submitting more projects than what we get money for, because we're not gonna be able to go back, unless we're gonna do every one of those projects, we're not gonna be able to recapture the money or use the money that was supposed to be allocated to that project. That doesn't sound right.
I think we're going to have to come up with a priority list within the county, and along with the funds that they have, maybe even in addition to the 2.4 million, they'll go down the list, and probably wherever that stops, that's the
That's where
projects
the
above it.
2.4
Yes,
stops.
that's correct.
Except that,
that's
was
the way
there
I
a
would-
matching requirement to some extent?
20%,
20%.
which is 400 or so.
So if they give us $1 million, then in effect, we've got to spend 1.25 million in order to be able to fully use the $1 million. So once we have $1.25 million worth of project, we can use all the $1 million money. There's still a lot of questions on y'all's faces. Maybe
Well, your
I've got
analogy.
you're not
has-
shaking your head, and he is shaking his head, and it concerns.
The reason that the Association of Counties suggested that we at least double the amount of project value that we submit for the grant is because there's going to be a lot of counties that don't utilize any of their allocation. And so there will be money left on the table by them that all the other counties who have submitted projects will have access to, but only up to the amount of the project value that they submit. So if we submit more than we are initially being allocated, then we have a little cushion with which to grab more that is left on the table.
So if we submit 4 projects, that totals $6 million, and let's just assume that each one of the projects is $1.5 million. If they allocate us $3 million worth of money, can we spend that $3 million on the first two projects, or are you telling us that we have to allocate some of that $3 million to all four projects?
My understanding is that we have to spend a little bit on every project we submit.
Do you agree with that?
Not necessarily.
That's kind of why I was asking, because I didn't see.
I think they're going to go down there, and the cutoff is going to be according to our priority list.
We
As far
can
as how much-
pay Allison $5,000 and have him come in here and tell us what we can and can't do.
We don't need to pay.
I know.
I've got a question.
But but I guess that's very critical, because if it's just a matter of we start down and when we run out of money, then there's no reason why we shouldn't submit every one of these.
That's true.
And we have 30 days to find out the answers to those questions, because that is part of the grant application process, which is not due until February the 7th. Establishing the zone is something
And
that
all
we will
I'm
have to.
suggesting to y'all is we better, as I expected, we would come to this meeting today and ask questions. We can't wait.
Some of us are trying.
Well, in a minute, I'll be glad to turn over the floor and let you ask yours. But
Thank you, Judge.
I guess right now, though, what concerns me is that I still think we need to have another workshop where we can define what and make sure we've got these questions answered, because if today was the deadline, we would be in trouble. And I'm afraid we're going to end up in exactly the same situation when it actually does become a deadline. Commissioner Brooks, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you for
Go ahead and
asking.
ask it at this point in time.
This money is supposed to be for mitigation of damage to roads by oil and gas activity. To what extent is that concept taken into consideration in the choice of these projects and in the assessment of these projects?
We verified that there was oil activity or an oil or a gas well along these roads or in the close proximity. We can't determine what the damage was caused by the gas traffic or just general traffic. Some of it may be to concrete trucks in areas where there may be construction of houses and stuff
Some of
like
it
that.
could be to poor boundaries.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, we can't determine what that is. We just look at the road and see according to these factors.
The
What-
traffic volume, you can't determine the traffic volume, the trucks, the oil and gas trucks volume?
Probably not at this time. No, and a lot of it's history. There's not a lot of activity going on other than maintenance out there right now on those wells. As far as the building of those wells, that's the past. And we did receive money from some of the gas companies to help repair them through the years, and we used it. But no, it was not. We just looked at the roadway and evaluated it according to the criteria. We couldn't figure out exactly what was the purpose, but a lot of it could have been the gas and oil, because there's wells associated with every one of these roadways.
That's what I was asking.
Yes.
Thank you.
So what is your suggestion as to the boundary of the zone? What are the options?
I would think that, personally, I would think it would have to be one of your top priorities, because you want to make sure it's the one that gets picked,
So we want to build a zone around the top priority.
or probably within that first $2.5 million that you submit. And that's the reason, I think we're going to have to develop a priority list of all these projects, as a county, not as just a precinct.
But what if the priorities are spread across the county? In 4 different precincts, how are you going to build a contiguous zone?
There was a recommendation made by the Association of Counties that they recognize that the reinvestment zones are not feasible in all projects. There are just some areas that will not, even if you draw the boundary, there will not be enough of an increment due to
make a difference.
to make a difference, exactly. So they said, if you're just drawing one of these zones to access the grant funds, make it a minimal zone. They made that suggestion. They said, don't go as far as just doing it right-of-way to right-of-way. That will be seen by TxDOT as a bad faith effort on the concept, but a minimal zone just to access the funds is not going to, count against us in the grant process.
And again, the length, is the minimum length 10 years or is it until all the repairs are made?
You're exactly correct. It's the limit for the zone is 10 years or until all the projects within that zone have been addressed, if it's shorter than that period.
And within that 10 years or within that period, again, it is 100%. In a lot of our TIFs, we do a percentage of the increased value, but for these things, it is 100% until such time as you meet
Of the increase.
of the increased tax value. Not of the, of the increased value for tax purposes.
That's correct.
At this time, I'm going to open a public hearing and ask if there's anyone here wishing to speak to this matter. There being none, then we will close the public hearing. Are there any other questions at this time from anyone? Then the next step along this trail is?
The next step would be to establish the zone, and we'll probably will need to have another work session sometime between now and the end of January. We have to have at least 30 days before the court can adopt an order creating the zone. The earliest possible date for that would be January the 28th or February the 4th in order to meet the grant application deadline. So we will be trying to work with Bill and with the precincts to narrow that list of projects down and come to a final determination for a recommended zone.
Is there somebody with TxDOT that you can contact who will answer your questions on this,
Yes, sir.
that we can believe in?
That was
sure
that second part of that question was a little difficult there. I mean, it's.
Yes, sir. I believe there is.
And who would that be?
I don't know that person's name at this point, but I'm sure there is. John Barton was suggested at one time, but getting a hold of him is pretty difficult.
I'm not sure we might not consider bringing this Locklord attorney back in from.
Doing what?
There's an attorney in Austin that does some work for Hillwood, and he does a lot in this area. So.
For Hillwood?
Yep.
Why don't we just go ahead and pick one over there and get it done?
I agree.
That's what we're going to do anyway.
No,
Pretty obvious
I don't
to me.
think it real. I think, from the most part, and this is what I'm still trying to figure out. I think we want to pick an area where there may or may not be a significant amount of development going on, either now or for the next period of time, because I don't think it limits our ability to draw down the cash from the state. I think what we want to be careful of is if we pick a road that there's going to be a tremendous amount of development going on, then that increment is going to go in there for potentially for a long period of time at 100% of whatever the increased value of the land around that. And I agree, if we just do between the right-of-ways, that's not going to be, I think, a credible effort. So, I mean, I think the two or three things that we need to get a better understanding of is what kind of right-of-way do we need to describe within this. I think we need to think about the impact on development and what it may mean on how much of a zone we include. And you know, it may very well be that we want to go out into a more remote area and let that be, and how much of an impact that has on our ability to get additional monies. And those are the things, who's the actual committee that is going to pick these or make these grants? Is it going to be the commission?
The Commissioners Court, I mean,
You're
they're-
going to appoint committee.
oh, the state. They keep referring to TxDOT. I don't know specifically who that is that's going to be making those.
And I guess ultimately, we have to submit a board for this search. As I think it goes down, after y'all give me some names, I submit those to y'all and you approve them. I think the court has to approve. I think I'm supposed to make those recommendations. But they have to be so many from the oil and gas companies.
Up to 3.
There has to be 2, I think, business folks,
Just 2 citizens,
2 citizens.
and up to 3 members of the oil and gas industry. And
So-
they are purely an advisory body to the Commissioners Court.
We make the decision, they provide the counsel, the advice.
Yes.
Basically.
Okay, I thought they were the board like the TIF boards to this SERS.
That is not how it's described in this specific statute. They advise on the projects and the spending of the increment within the zone, if there are more than one roadway impacted within that zone.
I guess that's why I'm just saying, if anybody has any other questions, I think we need to begin to draw a list up and then have someone here, because regardless of whether we draw a list up or not, there's going to be another question that someone's going to have that we're not going to have the answer to when it comes time to do it.
Is there some document or something you can provide us, the legislation, the kind of a Q&A that maybe TxDOT is, I mean, we can't be the only county that has a question. So I'm assuming that there are.
I can make that available to you, yes, sir. The legislation that lays out this process, TxDOT did provide a PowerPoint presentation on their website. I can copy the court on all of that information.
In fact, we can, Tom, is that what, don't you have a copy of all that?
Yes, sir.
We can make a copy and let y'all take that with you. Any other questions at this time?
We're seeking direction of the court as whether or not to proceed. I guess we need a motion to that effect.
And the motion basically at this point in time is just to proceed toward the creation of the County Energy Transportation Reinvestment Zone.
Yes.
So
Make that motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Ms. Worthy, would you like to come down and receive and
Good morning.
good morning?
Good morning.
We request that you receive and file the personnel agenda.
So move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file the personnel agenda. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Court members, you have before you the approval of the claims, including the addendum.
Move for the
Let me see
approval of
just
the
a
claims,
minute.
including the addendum.
Claims.
Second.
Is one of the claims, seemed like I read somewhere here, Debbie, if I could find it, that we're paying for a cell phone in the sheriff's department that was lost. Where was that? And the officers said they never received it. Where the devil did I read that? Yeah, right here.
This was a risk management.
Yeah.
That's a inmate,
Huh?
the inmate,
Where they The inmate claims that they had a mobile phone, but then the sheriff's department said that they didn't have it.
Right, right. There was a resident.
Normally, you're sort of hard-nosed about paying claims like this. Why are we paying this one?
Well, we actually have paid several of these, but the property records show that he had a cell phone when he checked into the jail, but when he was released, I should say booked in, checked in is not really the right word. When he was booked into jail, the property records showed that he had a cell phone as part of his property, but it was not as his property when he was released.
Okay.
And the sheriff's department does a very thorough search when something like that happens. I mean, they're looking through other property bags, they're looking at people that were released in that time frame. So they do put out some effort when there is a claim of lost property.
Any other discussion? Please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Is there any other business at this time? Then we are adjourned.